Hello, it's David Fox from the Business of Higher Ed podcast. Welcome to another episode brought to you by the Fox Education. Today, I'm thrilled to be part of telling a story of generosity, of vision, of expertise in the business of higher education, and of a unique model of growth at a small university that is one of only a very, very few successful integrations of a successful private for-profit business into a post-secondary institution. So what we're talking about today is Casagrande Institute for Higher Education Effectiveness, which is at Viterbo University, which is in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And to talk about the Casagrande Institute, we have Frank Casagrande and we have Dr. David Bauer. So a little bit about them. Frank Casagrande brings 40 years of combined expertise in consulting and education and executive compensation. He led the higher education sector at A Group for a decade, and it contributed extensively to their work on executive compensation for tax-exempt organizations. He did this following a 10-year tenure in tax benefits and actuarial services at KPMG, and before that, Buck Consultants. He has roots in education as a middle and high school teacher and roles as an adjunct professor at Rutgers University and Montclair State University. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Applied Mathematics, a Master of Arts in Teaching, and an Executive Compensation Certificate, complementing his background as a retired enrolled actuary. Frank, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, David. Glad to be here.
Dr. David Bauer. Dr. David Bauer leads the Casagrande Institute, which we're going to get to what that is in a few minutes, managing day-to-day operations and drawing on more than 20 years of experience in consulting, education, and leadership. He specializes in enhancing the effectiveness of faculty compensation practices and evaluating programs funded by government agencies and private foundations. David has a very broad academic background in psychology with a primary emphasis on behavioral neuroscience and quantitative analytics. And I like this one as well, additional scholarly interest in moral judgment. So Dr. Bauer has a Ph.D. from the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee and a Bachelor of Arts from Hope College. Dr. Bauer, thanks so much for joining the podcast today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Great. So, the Casagrande Institute for Higher Education Effectiveness. Frank, let's set the table here a little bit, okay? First, can you describe your leading work through your consulting firm prior to your generous gift to Viterbo University? So Casagrande Consulting, what it was doing before the gift.
Sure. So an interesting journey. You know, the Yiddish expression, der Mensch fragt und Gott lacht, always fascinates me. Man plans and God laughs. So approximately 25 years ago, after teaching for a while, I came back to consulting and moved towards consulting with both institutions of higher education and healthcare organizations, primarily in the area of executive compensation. There were some tax law changes and opportunities that created itself, but Hay Group allowed me to create a higher ed practice. And then the recession of 08-09 hit. And as a result of that recession, Hay Group had to make some really important but hard decisions. And one of them was to close the higher ed practice. I understood the business need for that. And I was, at the time, 50 years old, recession. There wasn't a lot of opportunity to do anything other than to launch my own firm. And interestingly enough, on the day they tell you that you're going to be redundant, that's the nice word for it, I was required to box my materials out of my office and actually physically leave the office that day. It's good for everybody. It was good for me. It was good for those that were remaining. Nobody likes to see ghosts walking the hallway. In that process, I had a paper come out of a folder, and I had written a business plan to launch my own consulting firm 3 years earlier, and I had forgotten about it. So it was Monday, April 2nd. I came home to my wife in the middle of the day, which I had never done. I mean, Hay Group was a good firm, but you worked hard and long hours. And she said, "What are you doing home?" And I said, "Well, I got laid off." She said, "April Fools." I said, "No, it's Monday, April 2nd." I said, I explained the rationale. She said, "What are you going to do?" And I showed her the paper. And the paper was Frank A. Casagrande Consulting, LLC. And my intention was to be a sole provider of executive compensation consulting services in higher education. There's a couple of boutique firms with individual leaders. And I did what I needed to do for the first year or two. And as the market evolved, I moved from executive compensation to faculty compensation. I had a former president be interested in joining us. He was doing board and president evaluation. Originally, I said, "I'll just refer the work to you." He said, "No, I want to work for you." And I said, that wasn't my business plan. My business plan was to be a sole proprietor. Subsequently, a couple of years later, I had an executive coach referred to me from my prior employer, and we brought executive coaching. So really, Casagrande Consulting, before the transition into the Casagrande Institute, was board leadership and compensation effectiveness. Board effectiveness by the former president, leadership effectiveness both in presidential evaluation and executive coaching, and compensation effectiveness mostly in exec and faculty comp. I partnered with a third party on staff compensation, but for the most part, for the 15 years of the firm, we were primarily a compensation consulting firm with the niche in higher education.
So that's even before we get to Viterbo University, it's quite a
There
journey.
was a specific need within the smaller institutions of higher education to serve them at an affordable price. And it became clear to me actually on the first day, April 2nd, 2009, when I had a proposal to a small liberal arts college that was issued under my prior employer. And I wanted to make sure with them it was okay to follow up. And they released me from any non-compete and non-solicitation requirements for that and allowed me to call. I called the chief academic officer, and it was Wagner College in Staten Island. And I spoke to the provost and basically said, same process, half the price, and sold the project on the first day of my company. So it went from 100,000 to 50,000, but that pricing model was very much needed. The large firms really couldn't size their services to the smaller institutions, and that was our model. We were going to be top consultants at an affordable price.
So for those smaller schools who often are in desperate need of help at times, they need someone who can address. And I would imagine as you did more of that, you became even more expert, not only in your compensation piece and your leadership piece, but in the challenges faced by smaller institutions.
Our business model requires that before we think about what we do, we understand the business of our clients. And the business of small colleges is a really unique and challenging sector. And all too often, some of the other service providers come in with a template version of how to do things that's not really right-sized to the institution. We're doing work in a broad spectrum, everywhere from seminaries to R1 institutions, but the bulk of our business is in smaller private not-for-profits. We have not worked with public universities in any extensive fashion, primarily because of the challenges with procurement. And they are unique cultures and environments, and there's plenty of folks available that are providing them and interested in them. There was really this abandoned sector. And later, when we talk about the reason for the donation, I can explain more about that.
Well, there's no time like the present. Uh, so very few people, I think it's fair to say, would take a successful consulting firm that they've built from zero to very successful, and embed it in a university. So let's talk about your vision. What inspired that decision to gift the future of your very successful consulting firm to a university?
Again, this Yiddish expression, der Mensch sprach und Gott lag, it wasn't my plan.
Oh,
Right. There was a bigger plan in God's mind for me to do something meaningful, and I really leaned into that. I did entertain conversations to sell it. I mean, it was, like you said, it was successful. But there were really three or four things that happened that made that not the right solution. Number one is that most of the firms that I was speaking with wanted 2 or 3 years
fair.
of my time, and God doesn't give us forever. He promises us, time, but never a defined amount. And so I did not want to go back to the life I had prior to the 15 years of the firm with a consulting firm. I appreciate all the time and all the investments. I got paid well for that, but I didn't want that to potentially be the last 3 years of my life, which it could be. It's no one's promise. So that was clear. They really wanted me more than they wanted the firm, which was the second thing, because mostly what they wanted to do was to put me back on the larger, more complex institutions and projects. They weren't interested in servicing the sector, which our firm had nurtured and developed over a 15-year period, which was, smaller private not-for-profit colleges. As a result of that, they also wanted to almost triple my billing rate, which would have essentially taken me out of the ability to serve. So, and I went through that dance a couple of times because, from a due diligence standpoint, I thought it was prudent to do so. I have an annual retreat where I go into the woods for a couple of weeks. Some people call it hunting season. I call it a retreat. I enjoy my time in the woods, but it's not about just hunting. It's about more. And when I get to my final resting place, which is in the woods, at the beginning of the time, I get down and I thank God for the year I was given. And then for the 2 weeks in the woods, I think and pray and meditate around what's next. And on the last day, as close to sunset as possible, I get down on my knees and I say, if you're done with me, I'm already here. Save everybody a trip. And it became clear to me he wasn't done with me, and that part of the vision that he was giving me was to say, this needs to exist somewhere. And I started to think about, okay, well, what does this look like? How does this look? I entertained conversations with other entrepreneurs that might want to embed it. Nothing fit. In the meantime, I'm working at Viterbo University. And there were so many things that were familiar and comfortable to me on that campus. And so it became clear not only that I was to donate the firm, but remain involved with the firm. And there were a number of reasons why Viterbo was the right place, and I can get into that now. Or
That was my next
I've
question.
had the privilege of working with several Franciscan colleges. About a third or more of our portfolio is Catholic. And I've worked with Siena College, I worked with St. Bonaventure, I worked with Viterbo, um, University of St. Francis. I've worked with a number of them. And in doing so, I learned more about St. Francis himself. And what folks that read about him learn is that he was a veteran. And part of his experience, many folks see as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And my dad passed when I was very young. The gentleman who took over the role of being that paternal force in my life was my godfather, Uncle Phil, not a blood relative. And But he was a POW in World War II, a depression baby, and he struggled all of his life with nightmares of his experience. So being the other thing that happened here was when I worked at Siena College, now Siena University in New York, I had the good fortune of staying in the friary with the members of the order, and I just got to see this unique charism that was somewhat unlike the church that I remembered as being more rigid and formal. This was more loving and welcoming. Again, all these things come together. So the reason I was working at Viterbo University on a compensation project was the president, Rick Tritley, had met me when he was at St. Bonaventure,
Okay.
maybe 10, 15 years earlier. And he said, he became president there. And he said, Frank, I need some work done. Why don't we see if it's a good fit? So in the process of this, the way we do our work is we start with a diagnostic phase to see what's going on. Is the institution ready for more work? We ask for some facts and figures. We ask for access to some people. We do some preliminary quantitative and qualitative analysis, and then we feed it back to the organization. And we did a faculty project and a staff compensation project, and there's always one faculty member who does their own analysis of faculty compensation. I'm presenting my reflections and analysis, and I have heard that there is this professor who has done their own analysis at Viterbo. And it winds up that it is Dr. Bauer, David, who's done this. And I basically say, come up and tell us what you found. Tell us, share the information. He'd already shared it. It was already being shared throughout the university. So it was foolish of me not to, say, let's see what you've done. And it was brilliant. It was limited in a couple of fashions that you wouldn't know about unless you'd done a lot of it. But there's always one of them. And usually the analysis is not as strong as what David Bauer brought to the table. So why Viterbo? Number one, its mission to serve underserved populations and many first generation college students like myself, veterans. There's a safe place on campus. Just got a email today about wings for veterans. They take care of their veterans. My dad came to the U.S. in 1939 from war-torn Europe at the time, and he was valedictorian. College wasn't a choice. So I wanted to make sure that resources were available for underserved, and margin for mission is at the core of us. The other thing I was concerned about, because I had conversations with actually my former associates at Hay Group who had gone into academia, several of whom had become deans of business schools.
Okay.
And I asked them about this concept of embedding a consulting firm, and they had tried it a couple of times and it failed. And I asked them why it failed. And they basically said there was not an entrepreneurial culture within the university to keep it going. So I talked to the chief academic officer at Viterbo. So I had already checked the list that Rick Tritley, the president, a veteran himself, and setting up a place for veterans was I looked at the Pell eligible rates. It was clearly serving and under that fit. Now I had to make sure that it would survive. And so Tanya Wagner, who is the chief academic officer at Viterbo, actually is and has an entrepreneur background in the coffee business out of Seattle.
Really?
So not your traditional academician, and she saw the potential of it, right? So now I've got the president, I've got the chief academic officer within their school of business, which is where the institute sits under the Center for Professional Learning, is also the Center for Professional Learning that has some really, really neat stuff going on in and around servant leadership, in and around compression planning. They're already doing quasi consulting in the form of education mostly, but they're already looking at non-traditional streams of revenue, right? So all that's missing is who's going to run this thing, because I'm retiring sooner or later, not so soon, not so late, but sooner or later I'm out of the picture. And so David and I had struck up a rapport while he was still a professor at Viterbo. And after seeing his work, I said to him, if you ever looking to do any subcontracting as a faculty member, reach out to me. I could probably use you. We stayed in touch, and I'll let David talk about what happened in the meantime, because I think that's an important characterization, and then how his positioning as director was kind of the last piece of the puzzle. I would tell you is all the piece. You couldn't plan this. There had to be a more divine plan involved. You couldn't; these pieces wouldn't come together naturally.
I can tell my side of the story here, which aligns with Frank's
Great.
side. But as Frank indicated, I was a faculty member, as a full faculty member, full professor of psychology at the time that we met. I had been at Viterbo for about 15 years at that time in that role, and at a small college, small university, faculty wear many hats. There are lots of things that you do. You teach a breadth of courses related to your disciplinary expertise. You mentor research students or artistic students, depending on your discipline. You assume leadership responsibilities. You rank up, you get tenure, so you do all of those things. And at that time, I think I was the chair of the psychology department. I had served as chair of the IRB for 5 years. I was chair of the promotion and tenure committee, and so I had a lot going on, but I was also feeling stagnant in some ways because I had developed some more interest in data analysis and visualization, and I had been very intentional about completing some um, educational opportunities to help develop those skills further. And there were sort of limited ways for me to employ those skills within my career as a faculty member. And of course, well, what do you do as a faculty member if you want to keep moving? Uh, well, there are two options. The primary option is to move into administration. So, you take on a dean position or a vice president position, etc. And that didn't strongly appeal to me because it was it wasn't the type of role that would again allow me to do what I wanted to do more practically with data and analysis and that sort of thing. The other option is to leave academia and you do something outside, in private business. And so I started looking for external opportunities and uh, came across a position that does program evaluation for grant funded initiatives. So think NSF, NIH, NASA, other federal agencies, state agencies, and private foundations that provide grants. Well, part of the grant process is to have ideally an independent external evaluator partner with you to help make sure that as you work through the grant, upon implementation, that the activities are aligned with the objectives, that you're measuring things in appropriate ways, and that you get IRB approval as necessary, all those types of things. And so I joined this consulting firm. Right before I did that is when Frank and I connected at Viterbo. So I had, as Frank indicated, conducted my own analysis of faculty compensation. And, as any good social scientist does, when you conduct an analysis and you write a report, you point out known limitations of your analysis. So I had that embedded within like the things that I was aware of that were limitations of, related to the type of data that were available to me to inform the analysis and the generalizability of the results, et cetera, et cetera. And Frank points out that, yeah, there are things that I wasn't aware of in terms of limitations that are really important. And why this is relevant, one of the reasons why this is relevant is because now with our work with faculty compensation, I can help faculty understand more clearly why, comparing yourself, your compensation with compensation of the public university faculty down the road from you is not really the appropriate way to go about it, right? You can't cross the revenue streams, basically. So anyway, I joined this consulting firm that does program evaluation, and somebody told Frank that I had left. We had met, we'd had a couple of conversations, but Frank sends me an email out of the blue that says, congratulations on taking a leap and best of luck to you. And if you have questions about the consulting world, let me know. Well, at that organization, things were going great until they weren't, and decisions were being made about firing people that I didn't agree with, quite frankly. And it seemed like upper management was sort of uh, um, creating a challenging business environment. We'll put it that way. The business no longer exists, by the way, but I saw sort of where the direction was heading, and I reached out to Frank for advice and thoughts. And we had a few conversations, and he helped me figure out some things. I ended up setting up my own business, uh, and I formed an agreement with that other business where I ended my full-time employment there, but I continued to subcontract through them for a client who really liked me and refused to work with anyone else at that time. And also then I started subcontracting to Frank for work on some faculty compensation projects. So we started this relationship in developing and with Frank's mentorship, helping me understand the business more thoroughly. And then it comes to light that he's planning to donate the future of his firm to Viterbo University, which I had just left. But clearly, I left on good terms, and they welcomed me back into the role as the director. And we've completed a full year now. We're over a year in. We started July 1st of 2024. And we continue to provide the services that Frank had consistently provided in the areas of compensation, executive, faculty, and staff compensation. We have board and president alignment services. We have a couple of new services too that we've brought online. One is academic program mix analysis, which helps institutions inform decisions about investment in, in areas of their academic portfolio or divestment from areas. And
Right.
and after my experiences in program evaluation, we're we're launching that as a service line as well. So grant funded program evaluation.
It's fascinating how, as you described it, the pieces just kept
Yeah.
falling together and directing towards a particular place, a particular person who you might not have otherwise thought of. Just an amazing story.
Yeah, David had the courage to leave a tenured faculty position. That takes courage, and you talk about the lack of entrepreneurial environment, right? Someone has to be thinking in that fashion for this to work.
Well, and
You know,
at a small private college to think entrepreneurially, for some of us, we'd say yes, that's what you have to do, but that's a big step for a small school. I really like I'm a big fan of the small colleges, small universities. I agree with you wholeheartedly about the programs for the veterans and supporting the veterans, in terms of what's next. Also the quantitative measurement uh, you're talking about in terms of analysis and the data-driven decision making. Want to move on, talk about a bit about the innovation in the business model. How many times or how few times it's happened where a for-profit existing successful business is embedded and continues successfully in a university. But so the Casagrande Institute, this represents a unique model, essentially turning the consulting practice into a university-based institute. There are lots of great things that could come from that, of course, generating revenue, but also having impact. How do you see this hybrid model reshaping the way universities think about diversification, partnerships, and their roles in the broader higher education ecosystem?
I see it from the outside. David sees it from the inside, which I think is part of why this makes sense. But I want to make clear that there's some tax things going on here that we want to make clear. We actually never donated the firm. We donated the future of the firm, which meant that as of July 1st, 2024, any new projects were institute projects. It's not possible without significant tax issues to put a for-profit in. It doesn't mean that your institute is not for profit, but it does mean that there are complications there. There were only a couple of other places where I saw it, and I want to give credit to those that kind of seeded the thought. I was fortunate enough to work with Blair Shepard at Duke Corporate Education when what he did was he took professors from Fuqua, the School of Business at Duke, who are doing significant consulting, and did set up a for-profit Duke Corporate Education. And then I was involved with them when they rolled the for-profit back into a not-for-profit. So this model of tapping the faculty, mental and capacity was really exciting to me. And obviously, I have one former faculty member who got it, being the director. But the opportunity potentially at some future point to engage more folks and tap into what the university is already doing in terms of research, scholarly productivity, teaching, but to generate revenue. We know that the revenue is limited. The other model that I was familiar with was the Bauer Institute at Robert Morris
Okay.
University, which serves not-for-profits in Southwest Pennsylvania. So there are colleges and universities who are thinking about alternate streams of revenue. We've done some work with some allied health programs, and one of the things that has come to mind is, should they be looking at clinics and clinical income, not just clinical practice? So moving outside of the tuition-driven, fundraising-driven uh, model of revenue is really, really important. I mean, just thinking about um, certificates
Yeah.
and thinking about non-traditional programming, which isn't too much of a shift from what they do, sometimes challenges small institutions that aren't thinking that way. Again, having Tanya as the chief academic officer with this entrepreneurial thinking. Also, I'd give credit to the board. The chair of the board is an executive at Quick Trip, and he understands and entrepreneurial and non-traditional streams of revenue. But moving the Center for Professional Learning had already stuck their toe into this area, and so what we have is we have a real catalyst for more. David's already thinking about more lines of service, as he's mentioned to you, the program evaluation and the academic mix analysis. I'm sure there'll be other things that come along as faculty members who might already be doing a little bit of consulting, but aren't interested or know how to find more. If we can figure out a way to, okay, I've got a faculty member who does this, are they interested in doing more?
Right.
And is it more profitable for the university to give them a course release or two to generate revenue that's not tuition revenue? They still have to cover their scale. And my suspicions are the margins on that revenue are going to be greater than the margins on tuition. And so again, the whole mantra here is margin for mission.
One, one of the things that we hope comes out of this is that other small institutions will look upon our initiative here of the Institute and generate some of their own ideas. And we're happy to help other institutions think about what types of businesses they might embed within their institution to help generate additional revenue in the same type of way. I mean, if you think about it, where do institutions get money from? And by the way, as an aside, right, as a faculty member, faculty, generally speaking, don't like to think about education as a business.
No. I'm very
Right.
familiar with that.
Yeah. Right. We don't get into it because we want to make money for ourselves or for the institution necessarily, right? We're in it for the learning and the provision of educational opportunities to students. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize that a college or university is a business, right? You've got money coming in and money going out, and in order for the institution to provide and serve its mission, you have to have some uh, uh, realistic revenue. And where does the revenue come from? From small institutions, it's primarily from tuition. Okay, so you have to focus on what programs you're offering, and are those programs bringing in students, and are those students, you know, um, paying a sufficient amount of tuition, and make sure you're not over discounting the tuition. And from a business perspective, you have to think about your academic portfolio, and you should evaluate that regularly to make sure that the types of programs that you're offering are the types of programs for which there is demand. and you have to make some careful decisions about cutting programs over time. And that's really hard for faculty to deal with. The other sources of revenue, you've got endowment at institutions, and there should ideally should be some growth of the endowment. You want to start digging into the endowment. That causes all sorts of downstream problems, but it's there in cases of emergency. But you know as well as we do that the endowment isn't just this piggy bank that you can draw from at will, right? It's broken up into lots of different individual funds and with designated purposes, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got tuition, you've got endowment, and then you've got other sources of revenue, right? At some institutions that might be athletics, fine arts performances. Viterbo has a strong fine arts arrangements and theater. We bring in some big
Yeah.
shows and
Broadway. You bring in some Broadway show
yep.
uh, into your arts center.
Bernadette Peters was here 2 weeks ago. Actually, was in town at that time, and he babysat for us. He watched our kids, so my wife and I could go out and enjoy the Bernadette Peters show. She was amazing. Last week we
Great.
had you've seen the show Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Those guys were here on campus last week. It was
No,
amazing.
in looking at the events and the things that are going on at Viterbo and the facilities, beautiful facilities. Some of your athletic facilities, lovely.
Hmm.
Uh, Arts and the community. I'm a big fan of the community and the college and the college and the community to the extent you can do that. And I see a lot of that at Viterbo, and
Hmm.
yeah, no, this is part of why I like the small schools is because you can't help but get your hands dirty. You really have to try not to be involved. And my compliments to your
Yeah.
university on everything that seems to be happening. You're a great school to go to for the certain types of students that want that kind of
Yeah,
environment.
and the overarching point again is that many institutions need to start thinking outside the box of additional sources of revenue in the light of, tuition revenue challenges. And this is a sector-wide sort of issue. There are many headwinds in higher education right now. And this is one model. This is an approach that can help. Again, from my insider sort of perspective as a faculty member, this isn't the type of thing that would have come to my mind, at least as somebody who wasn't in a business school. I was a psychologist. And so, from a traditional sort of academic perspective, where do you get money? You get money from, okay, having students, but also you get money from grants. Okay, so this is another potential source of external revenue. You get grants from federal agencies or foundations. And in my background, that helps fund your research endeavors. So, if you're running a neuroscience lab, then you need supplies, and supplies are expensive, and you need facilities to maintain your animal colonies, whatever model organisms you're using. And so you ask for money, you apply for grants to get that sort of money. But again, at many small institutions, there are exceptions to this, but at many small institutions, you don't have the robust facilities to do the high quality research work that is really necessary for publication and for successful grant applications. The model there is more about providing mentored experiences to students to help set them up for success in their careers, either in graduate schools or out into industry. So getting big grants isn't the type of thing that a lot of faculty at these types of institutions can do. But setting up a business isn't the type of thing that I would think about. Most of the faculty conversations about, well, what do we do in terms of generating more revenue? We're about, okay, well, let's launch a new program, or let's reframe an existing program, or let's create a new program track. Or it was all about, trying to think of ways to get more students, right? Or let's look at a different student population. Let's target non-traditional learners, adult learner populations, international students. Although these days that's more concerning, right? So um, those are the types of things that faculty would typically sort of think about. At least faculty who are not in a business school, and that's
And for
that's somewhat
me,
limiting. So
yeah,
hopefully, what we can help other faculty at other institutions think about is, well, what types of entrepreneurial endeavors might we take on as a project embedded within the institution to help generate revenue?
Yeah.
and thinking at a micro level about the results, I think is important. So what we hope to do is at some point in time be able to fund 10 full scholarships with the margin of the business. These are 10 lives that would be changed potentially for generations to come. Margin for mission, a gift in perpetuity. I certainly could have liquidated the company and gifted the money,
Yeah.
but I don't believe that it would have been as generational an impact.
Mhm.
Also, I my father was a valedictorian of his high school class, and college wasn't an option. I wanted to make a generational difference with the margins and change lives for generations to come. If we could, even 5 full scholarships at an institution like Viterbo, we're not dedicating the gift. We're putting it into general revenue, but we know they're already doing a heavy lift because they're Pell eligible. We already know how much their scholarships. And again, trying to find ways to support a very, very, very important mission is core to the reason for the gift, the reason that this makes sense. And I suspect that there's not a lot of environments that are ready for this type of entrepreneurial thinking, behavior. I can't imagine that there's as many people as David Bauer around who would embrace leaving something very predictable. For David could tell you the year has been an interesting year. I don't know that he would have imagined the the um, the pace, drinking from a fire hose, learning how to run a company, right? Learning more about his individual consulting expertise in and around faculty compensation, dealing with some of the nuances of the cultural differences between operating a business and operating a university that has to get dealt with, paperwork, all of the things that in my own firm was simple because I didn't have this hierarchy of approval necessary. It was an interesting first year journey, but we've got a lot of that behind us. I'm sure that as the institute evolves and as we think about doing other things within the institute, but it's all going to remain about education. We actually are just crossing over into potentially the K through 12 private not-for-profit environment because we see a lot of comparabilities, especially in the uh, high schools.
Yes.
That
Right.
so again, while it's the Institute for Higher Ed Effectiveness, it could be more than that at some point.
Well, yeah, no, that sounds great. The linkages, the pathways from high schools into some form of post-secondary education. We really, I think, in higher education, unless we're one of these schools that students just show up every fall, um, we have to be thinking about these different things and different ways of doing it. And frankly, that, I think, if when we do that, that also helps the students. That also helps the institution. If we are, as you say, if we're looking at different options, different pathways, we're seeing some really, really neat things that can come when you work with, when you bring you build a big tent party, right? A big tent. You've got people who have studied and research and that type of that work, and then you've got people who've been in business and that experience, and then you've got students who are looking to grow. I know enough to know that it's not all a bowl of cherries. It's challenging, and we continually learn, but it sounds like it's off to a great start, and it sounds really exciting in terms of the directions that you may be going. The work focuses on higher education effectiveness, as helping rather institutions. I believe there's some help in strengthening recruitment and retention, and I think all of this goes to overall student success, as well as institutional success. Can you share a specific example of how this kind of consulting has tangibly changed or may tangibly change outcomes for a college or university, and what lessons other institutions might take from that?
We mentioned earlier board and president alignment. And so I would think that from a macro level, the greatest impact, positively or negatively, happens when those folks are not aligned. Sometimes we're brought in for an executive compensation discussion involving the president's contract. And when we get involved in that, performance conversations are important, and my experience with this is everyone has the best president in the world until they don't.
Until they don't. Okay. Yeah.
Right. And so being able to clarify through our work with board and president alignment and executive compensation whether or not the president that did what you needed them to do for the last 5 years is the same president as what you need in the next 5 years. And this is particularly important in turnarounds. So if we can gain clarity on what the role is of the next president, we could gain clarity around the competencies necessary to be successful in that role. We could avoid what we are seeing right now in a tremendous amount of turnover in higher education leadership because they picked the wrong kind of leader. And so there's lots and lots of research in the business world as to what the cascading effect of a turnover of a CEO is. That translates to a university president as well. Because as soon as the president leaves, the vice presidents start taking phone calls. When the vice presidents leave, the functions, especially enrollment management, get disrupted. So if we could put in place, and we have put in place, packages where the right president stays, that you'll see the impact on the results for longer serving right presidents, and how the whole organization can move, because these organizations do not turn quickly enough. All right, they simply don't. And so having a stable president means a stable cabinet. Having a stable cabinet means a stable enrollment management process, a stable advancement process, a stable academic offering, but a dynamic academic offering. So higher education effectiveness is through people. It starts with the relationship between the board and the president. So you have everything. Higher ed is a people business. 75% of its expenses are compensation and benefits.
Really?
So yeah, if you look at a balance sheet of a small private college, it's 60 to 75% compensation and benefits. And so if we could make sure that those expenditures are efficient, that they're not paying people too much or too little, that again drops back through the margin. The margin provides scholarship. And so I think we have a some of our services look very micro in their impact. You would argue, what does faculty compensation do? Well, faculty compensation consulting ensures that people are being paid affordably within the resources of the institution. They're internally equitable, which many states now are leaning towards a more Canadian approach of pay equity, which is really challenging. We got external competitiveness, and we have, especially within our faith-based, a just wage. And if you treat people well, not generously, fairly, more than likely they're going to stay, and more than likely they were attracted for more than just the money.
Yes.
They were attracted for the mission. So all of these things pull to really seeing the mission of the university realized through greater effectiveness and greater efficiencies and stronger relationship.
To add to that a little bit, one of the primary challenges that we encounter across the sector, across institutions with whom we work, is uh, related to communication effectiveness between those different levels, between the various constituencies. So if there's lack of clarity and effective communication around how compensation decisions are made, and um, both in terms of how compensation decisions are made at hire, upon hire and upon promotion, or what are the grades or levels or ranges. In a lot of cases, that just it doesn't exist. And when there's an information vacuum, then employees, faculty, staff start to conjure up their own ideas of how and why decisions are made. So helping point out those challenges in communication effectiveness and offering solutions related to how might you address that is one of the main things that we do, honestly. So aside from the analyses and whatnot, it's just, thinking about, well, how do we communicate effectively across these constituencies?
Isn't it amazing that so many things, when you think about it, so many things, they just communication is absolutely central to. You can have all kinds of skills, all kinds of tricks and analyses, and so much of it is communication. Future. You've got a year in drinking from a fire hose, you said. Now that this institute is part of Viterbo, what's next? How do you envision I mean, you've referred to this a bit, but how do you envision the role in shaping conversation around higher education effectiveness, not just for Viterbo, but for the sector as a whole, which is right now internationally, I believe, certainly in Canada, I think in the States, is going through some very choppy waters.
There are many headwinds to higher education, and most institutions are not immune to those headwinds. It does not look as though in the foreseeable future that those headwinds will abate either, right? So they're going to continue, and the sector as a whole needs to adapt accordingly and start thinking about things like, okay, well, what's the appropriate mix of academic programs that we want to offer, and what are alternative sources of revenue, etc. As far as the Institute is concerned, one of our overarching objectives is, as Frank mentioned, is margin for mission, and the way that we approach this is thinking about how many students can be positively affected by our work, right? So, our long-term goal of getting to the point where with regularity we can sustain about 10 students worth of scholarship for the institution. But beyond that, developing more of a thought leadership position within the sector, particularly for small to medium private not-for-profit institutions that would benefit most from our expertise on, these really important matters around compensation, fair faculty compensation and staff structures, et cetera, some of the nitty-gritty details. But also things like margin for mission and academic program margins and how do you build capacity for a grant funded program, things of that nature.
I also see something coming around the bend that I think is going to be something we'll have to figure out how do we support. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Council of Independent Colleges. They're a cohort of small liberal arts colleges of 250, 300. And they just announced last week an initiative that they are calling radical collaboration.
Okay.
So we have been involved with institutions who have come together with other institutions more on a one-on-one basis. We're familiar with some deeper, more radical collaboration of multiple private colleges rolling up. We what that means and what's going to happen and how we can support that. If you just think about the simple integration of two institutions that have their own compensation philosophy, their own pay scale, their own now one, are you going to maintain two? Are you going to maintain two different, or are you going to somehow come to an answer that works for both? And what is the relationship between the boards and the presidents look like as opposed to the board and the president? So, the other thing is we've been fortunate to have as part of our business model what we're calling rewired, not retired executives. So I don't think of myself as a retired executive. I think of myself as a rewired executive. We're going to have to figure out how do we keep that pipeline fresh at some point, hopefully not in the near future, but I may not be available to do executive compensation consulting. If we make it too Frank centric, then the line goes away with me. So in the future, trying to figure out, whom else might be interested in joining us? How do we complement the team that we have? How do we supplement them? It's a challenge going forward to think about sustaining the team. So it's going to be an interesting opportunity, and eventually, if you think about David's much too young to have this in his mind, but what does his succession eventually look like? What happens if there's not another David? Because I don't think it's the faculty member that succeeds him, because it wasn't the faculty member, the faculty identity that made David a good choice. It was the entrepreneurial spirit of a former faculty member that made, these are people challenges are going to be the greatest challenge of the Institute in perpetuity.
I think I'm a big believer that everybody wants to be part of something. They want to be part of something that's bigger than themselves. They want to feel like they're having an impact. And, where you can find people who are really passionate about a particular thing, right? As you said, it's not easy. It's not easy to find those people. But if you can find those people, boy, oh boy, can they do amazing things through organizations such as the Casagrande Institute and an institution where perhaps there's more opportunity to get your hands dirty. I go back to that at a smaller institution where people need to do more than this just what's in their job description. I mean, just that these schools just don't work if if that's in my opinion. But I want to thank you for speaking with me today. I go back to where we started. This is an amazing story, not only for the generosity, but in terms of the entrepreneurial thinking and things that schools need to be thinking about in terms of how are we moving forward? What does that look like? And effectiveness, whether it's compensation, whether it's the right people in the right positions, sustainability, succession, all these things so important and such big challenges to institutions internationally. So for those of our viewers who like this content, hit the like button below, hit the subscribe. There's lots of great podcast material. The Business of Higher Ed podcast, the biographies of both Frank and Dr. Bauer are going to be below on the YouTube channel. And Dr. Bauer, Frank, thank you so much for taking the time today to share this story and really help us see what can be in many ways, what can be, and the exciting work and different at Viterbo University that Casagrande Institute is doing. To those watching at home, have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.